Somewhere beneath the Mongolian steppe, there is a grave that has not been opened in 800 years, and everyone who knew where it was died to keep the secret. The ground here is not soft. Even in late summer, when the surface grass is at its greenest, that specific deep green of steppe grass that has been growing in this soil since before any civilization thought to name it, the permafrost begins a few feet down. Frozen earth that has not thawed since before the burial. Earth that holds everything it receives with a permanence that stone cannot match, that marble cannot approach, that no monument ever built by human hands has managed to equal. The wind across this landscape does not stop. It comes from the northwest in a continuous low frequency that is less a sound than a pressure, something the body registers before the ears do, the particular note of a place that has been open to the sky for 10,000 years and intends to stay that way. There are no landmarks, no walls, no markers of any kind in any direction to the horizon. That is not an accident. The trees you were looking at were planted deliberately. The grass beneath your feet was driven flat by horses, hundreds of horses, ridden back and forth across this ground in the days after the burial until the surface showed nothing different from the 10,000 square miles of identical steppes surrounding it in every direction. The people who did this then rode away and did not come back. Some of them were killed on the road home, so they could not tell anyone what they had seen. There is a reason this tomb has never been found that has nothing to do with luck and everything to do with the decision made the night he died that changed the rules of what a burial could mean. 800 years of silence, and the silence was not accidental. It was engineered by the man himself before he died, with the specific intention that no one would ever stand where you were standing and know it. And you are standing on it. Burkhan Khaldun region, northeastern Mongolia, August 12th, 2027, and every year since. What you are about to walk through is a reconstruction, not of a place, but of a disappearance, built from 5 distinct layers of evidence that together form the most complete picture available of what happened, what has been searched for, and why nothing has ever been found. The first is the secret history of the Mongols, written in 1240 AD, 13 years after his death, by Mongolian voices within living memory of the burial. It contains specific references to the sacred mountain, to his burial wishes, and to the cultural framework that governed how the concealment was carried out. It also contains a deliberate gap. The section covering his death is missing or was omitted. That gap is itself a form of evidence. The second is the Persian and Chinese court chronicle tradition. Giovanni writing in the 1260s, Rashid al-Din compiling his comprehensive Mongol history in the early 1300s, Marco Polo writing in the 1290s. Each account contains partial, sometimes contradictory details about the burial. Together, they form a picture full of agreement on the broad facts and disagreement on the specifics, which is exactly what you would expect from sources working from second-hand accounts of something that was deliberately kept secret. The third is modern remote sensing archaeology, specifically the joint Mongolian-American Genghis Khan Geo-Historical expedition of 2001 to 2005, which applied satellite imaging and ground magnetometry across the Khenti region, and the University of California San Diego's Valley of the Khans project of 2010, which recruited 10,000 volunteers to analyze 85,000 satellite images across 2,500 square miles of Mongolian terrain. Both found nothing matching the burial. The fourth is UNESCO's 2015 World Heritage designation of Burkhan Khaldun, which tells us both where the most credible search zone is and why excavation within it is currently legally impossible. And the fifth, The one that makes everything else feel different is the silence itself. 800 years of active, determined, well-resourced searching that has produced zero confirmed results. The absence of evidence is, in this specific case, one of the most significant pieces of evidence available. If you want to keep walking through history's greatest unsolved mysteries, subscribe right now and hit the bell. We go deeper every week. And before we continue, drop a comment. Do you think the tomb should be found and opened, or should it stay hidden forever? I want to know where you stand. I read every answer. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand why this tomb has never been found, you have to understand the man that made sure it wouldn't be. The mountain that holds this secret is not the largest mountain in Mongolia. It is not the most dramatic. It does not have the visual authority of the Altai peaks to the west, whose glaciers and vertical faces have the kind of obvious power that makes painters reach for their materials. It does not have the geological spectacle of the Gobi's formations to the south. The Khenti Range, where Burkhan Khaldun sits, is a landscape of forested ridges and open valleys, beautiful in the specific, understated way that landscapes are beautiful when they have been left entirely alone for a very long time. What Burkhan Khaldun has is meaning. In Mongolian Tengriist belief, the spiritual framework that predated and outlasted Buddhism, Islam, and every other religious influence that passed through the steppe across 2,000 years, certain mountains are not geographic features, they are ovo, sacred presences, the physical points where the earthly world and the eternal sky meet and recognize each other. Burkhan Khaldun is the most sacred mountain in the Mongolian tradition. It was considered sacred before Genghis Khan was born. It is considered sacred now. The UNESCO designation did not create that status. It acknowledged something that has been true for 1,000 years and shows no sign of becoming less true. His relationship with this mountain is documented in the secret history with a specificity that reads less like mythology and more like personal testimony. He was 17, or perhaps 18. His clan had been abandoned on the steppe, left without protection after his father's murder, the political logic of the steppe being that a dead patriarch's family was a liability and a danger to associate with. Enemies were pursuing him. He fled to the forests on Burkhan Khaldun's slopes and hid there while the pursuers searched for him in the open valley below. They did not find him. When he came down from the mountain alive, having understood in those days of hiding in the forest that his life was going to continue and that the continuation meant something, he faced south, removed his belt, hung it around his neck in a gesture of absolute submission that in Mongolian tradition indicates the depth of a debt too large to be expressed in ordinary terms, and prayed. He prayed for 3 days. He credited the mountain with saving his life, not metaphorically, specifically, and he returned to it throughout his reign, not for strategic reasons, not for political performances, but in the way a person returns to the place where they understood for the first time that they were going to survive. He designated it a protected zone, the first nature reserve in Mongolian history. Hunting on its slopes was forbidden. Access to its upper reaches was restricted. He spoke of it in terms the secret history records as genuinely devotional, the language not of a ruler managing his public image, but of a man keeping a private promise to a mountain. The reframe that stops every researcher who approaches this mystery for the first time is not the location, it is the scale. The Khenti strictly protected area, which encompasses Burkhan Khaldun and the surrounding terrain that represents the most credible search zone for the burial, covers 12,270 square kilometers. That is not a site. That is not a valley or a ridge or a stretch of riverbank. That is a landscape the size of a small country. Every square kilometer of it looks from the air and from the ground exactly like every other square kilometer of the surrounding steppe that surrounds it in every direction. The permafrost surface, the Siberian larch forest, the open steppe meadows, the river valleys, a repeat without variation across a search area that would take a lifetime to walk. And one of the reasons no one knows is that the history that tells us what to look for is deliberately incomplete.
And found nothing. Let that land for a moment before we go further. Not found very little, not found inconclusive evidence, not found promising candidates that require further investigation. 800 years of active, resourced, determined searching by people who had strong political and financial motivation to succeed, using every technology available to their era, and the result is the same in every century, in every language, from every direction of approach. Nothing. The search did not wait for the modern era. It began almost immediately. Within a generation of the burial, the Mongolian court itself had lost precise knowledge of the location. The people who knew were dead. The political logic of the concealment had worked so completely that even the institution most motivated to maintain access, the Mongol imperial family, found itself excluded from the secret within decades of the burial. Rashid al-Din, the Persian historian who compiled the most comprehensive account of Mongolian history ever written by a non-Mongolian observer, interviewed surviving members of the Mongolian court in the early 1300s, within 80 years of the burial, and acknowledged in his text that the location was unknown even to them. He could tell the reader that the burial had happened in the Burkhan Khaldun region. He could not tell them where. The Chinese imperial apparatus of the Yuan dynasty, the dynasty Kublai Khan established, making himself both Mongol Khan and Chinese emperor, had both the resources and the political motivation to locate the burial site. The founder of their legitimacy was buried somewhere in the Khenti region. Having access to that site would have been an extraordinary political asset. They searched. The records of the search survive in fragmentary form. The results do not survive because there were no results. The 14th century produced nothing. The 15th century produced nothing. The Soviet period brought systematic archaeological survey to Mongolia for the first time, methodical, well-funded, ideologically motivated to demonstrate scientific capability. Soviet archaeologists cataloged hundreds of sites across the Mongolian landscape during the decades of Soviet influence. They surveyed the Khenti region. Their records document Bronze Age burial mounds, medieval settlement patterns, evidence of human activity across thousands of years of Mongolian history. They did not find the tomb. The 20th century produced nothing. And then came the technologies that were supposed to change everything. The joint Mongolian-American Genghis Khan Geo-Historical expedition, running from 2001 to 2005, represented the most sophisticated remote sensing survey ever applied to this question up to that point. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating magnetometry, systematic field survey across the Khenti region's most credible candidate zones. The expedition was led by experienced archaeologists with genuine expertise in remote sensing methodology and genuine commitment to the search. They found previously unknown archaeological sites, Bronze Age burial complexes, medieval-era settlement evidence, artifacts that expanded the known archaeological record of the Khenti region in ways that were genuinely significant for Mongolian historical scholarship. They did not find the tomb. And then came the crowd. In 2010, researchers at the University of California, San Diego, launched the Valley of the Khans Project, a citizen science initiative that recruited 10,000 volunteers from around the world to analyze 85,000 satellite images covering 2,500 square miles of Mongolian terrain. The methodology was sound. Crowdsourced image analysis had been used successfully in other contexts to identify features invisible to automated processing, and the sheer volume of human eyes examining the imagery was expected to produce results that smaller research teams had missed. The volunteers flagged over 55,000 potentially significant features. Field teams investigated the most promising candidates in person, on the ground, with all the archaeological tools available to a well-equipped modern research expedition. They found things, real things, previously unknown archaeological sites of genuine historical interest, evidence of human activity across the search zone spanning thousands of years, the kind of finds that in any other context would be considered significant results. They did not find the tomb. 10,000 people, 85,000 images, 55,000 flagged features, field investigation of the most promising candidates, nothing. The search has now been conducted by Mongolian shamans following spiritual guidance, Chinese imperial agents operating on court intelligence, Soviet archaeologists with state resources, American academics with satellite technology, and 10,000 volunteers with time and interest and the collective processing power of a small institution. Every single one of them came back with the same answer. 800 years of searching, 10,000 volunteers staring at satellite images, and the steppe has given back exactly what it was asked to give back: nothing. In 2015, UNESCO added Burkhan Khaldun and the surrounding landscape to the World Heritage List. The designation acknowledges what Mongolians have known for 1,000 years, that this mountain and the landscape around it represent a living cultural and spiritual heritage of extraordinary significance. The ovo cairns on the slopes are maintained. The prayer flags are replaced when they fade. The herding families who have lived in this landscape for generations continued to live in it, maintaining relationships to the land that predate any archaeological project and will outlast any of them. The designation also, as a practical consequence of international heritage law, places the most credible search zone under protection that makes large-scale excavation legally impossible without Mongolian government approval. That approval has not been granted. It is unlikely to be granted in the foreseeable future, and the reasons for this are more complex than simple bureaucratic obstruction. They deserve to be understood rather than dismissed. The Mongolian government's position on the tomb is genuinely complicated and reflects genuine internal disagreement within Mongolian society, not between archaeologists and politicians, but between different versions of what the tomb means and what finding it would do to those meanings. Many Mongolians do not want the tomb found. Not all. The country contains multitudes on this question, as any living society does. But the conviction that disturbing the burial would release consequences the living are not prepared to manage is widespread and deeply held, rooted not in superstition, but in a coherent spiritual framework that has governed the relationship between the living and the dead in this culture for 1,000 years. The instruction to leave the burial undisturbed was given 800 years ago by the most authoritative voice in Mongolian history. Many people believe that instruction is still binding. More practically, Genghis Khan is the foundational figure of Mongolian national identity in a way that has no precise equivalent in most Western contexts. He is not simply a historical figure, he is the organizing principle of what Mongolia is and has been. The question of what happens to that identity if his tomb is opened, analyzed, and its contents become subjects of international archaeological dispute is not an abstract question. It is a question about who gets to define the meaning of the most important person in your national story, and whether you are willing to hand that definition to the international archaeological community. The answer, currently, is no. And underneath all the politics and the heritage law and the cultural conviction, there is something else, something that operates without being organized, coordinated, or even consciously maintained. The local Mongolian herding families of the Kenti region have, for generations, maintained a practice of not discussing what they know or believe about the burial location with outsiders. This is not a conspiracy. There is no committee meeting, no active silence enforcement mechanism. It is simply how things are in this landscape, by these people, in this landscape. The instruction to protect the secret was given 800 years ago by a man who is dead. It is still being followed by people who were never explicitly told to follow it. It passed into the culture the way all important things pass into cultures, quietly, gradually, without announcement, becoming simply part of how things are done in this place, by these people, in this landscape. The most effective protection the tomb has ever had is not the permafrost, or the planted trees, or the driven horses. It is 800 years of people who decided, without being asked, that some things should stay where they are. The reason this tomb has never been found is not bad luck. Let's set that aside entirely, because it has never been luck, and framing it that way misses the only thing